tonight we were doing how to shop for healthy foods at the grocery store. When I told my wife I was doing this, she said that, she's like, why are you doing that when you never go grocery shopping? So maybe what I should do is one on how to get out of grocery shopping and make your wife do it. But nevertheless, I think I still can impart some wisdom and help you guys shop a little bit for healthier food at the grocery store and understand what you see there. If you have questions, try to hold those to the end. That way, I'll take questions at the end. If I don't know an answer, I'm not going to just make up one, and so that way you're filled with false information. I'll take your email address, and I can email you or call you later with that question. So, yeah, if you have any questions, feel free, but try to hold those to the end, and we can go back over that stuff. So the first thing so things we're going to go over today is how to read nutrition labels, how to read ingredients, and also how to see past package advertising, and then what kind of things you want to fill your cart with. So it's not going to be 3 or 4 hours or anything. This will be done in probably 40, 45 minutes or so, depending on how many questions we get. So the first thing we want to go over is how to read a nutrition label. So if you ever see nutrition labels, oftentimes, you see the calories, you see the carbohydrates, fat, protein, all those things. But whenever you see carbohydrates, protein, and fat, those are your 3 macronutrients. So you have the 3 macronutrients of those. But a lot of times you see, at least with the carbohydrates and fat, you see subheadings with those. So first we're going to talk about fat. So a lot of times there's 2 that have to be on there. So they have the total fat, they have saturated fat, and they also have trans fat. And a lot more now with the things that are out there, trans fat is down to 0. With a lot of the negative publicity it's gotten, people have really tried to take that out of there so they can advertise there's 0 grams of trans fat. Something you should note with those is that if it's below half a gram, then they can put it as 0. They don't have to round it up they don't have to put a half a gram or 1. So just because it says 0 doesn't necessarily mean it is. So you want to look at the ingredients, and it says partially hydrolyzed or hydrogenated soybean, vegetable, something like that. There is going to be a little in there, but it's less than half a gram. That's better than a whole half gram or a whole gram, but nevertheless, there is a little bit in there. So that's one thing to take note on trans fat. Most things will say 0, and that's a good thing, but always check that. If it doesn't, normally there's an option that's, whatever type of food you're looking for that has 0 on there. The other thing that we have is saturated fat. Saturated fat is the fat, after trans fat, is the fat that we want least of. That being said, if it's from animals, it's a little bit better than some of our processed foods. So it depends on the type of animal or what they ate and whatnot, which we'll go a little bit over later when we talk about how to select meat. So after that, we have polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. Normally, they don't list those, but sometimes they do. The times that they do, it's normally a healthier food, and they want to advertise they have poly and monounsaturated fats. If they don't list those, the way you know is you take the total fat, and then you take minus the saturated fat, which they always list. And if there's any trans fat, then you just add the trans and the saturated and minus it from the total fat. So if there's whatever fat you see listed, you subtract from the total fat, and it'll give you your mono and your polyunsaturated fats. After that, you don't know which one is which, but both of them are healthy and both are good fats. Fats get a bad rap because they're high in calories. There's 9 calories per gram of fat. But the polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats are healthy fats. They're good. They lower your LDL, which is your bad cholesterol. They lower triglyceride levels, and they lower your chance for having heart disease. So monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats are very, very good for you. If you had too many of them, obviously they're still 9 calories per gram. It's going to put weight on you, but in general, those are good things to have. And so if you want to know how many of those you have, take your total fat minus the fat listed if those aren't listed. Now, if they are listed, they should all add up to the total fat. If they don't add up, and this goes for all the nutrients we talk about, if they don't add up, then it's because that, there's rounding, and so normally it's always within 1. So if you add them all up and it comes out to 19, and your total fat is 20, well, it's because of the decimal places in those. So that's fat. Now we're going to go to carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, there's even a few more things that they can list there. Normally you have your total carbs, you have your sugars, you have your fiber, and you can also have dietary fiber and also other carbs. The thing they have to list is carbohydrates. So say if you have, and this is the same thing, if you add them all up, you'll get your total carbs within a gram, depending on how they did the decimal with it and whatnot. So normally, if it's like I have Kashi cereal, if there's 20 grams of carbs in there, there's like 19 grams of other carbs and 1 gram of fiber. 19 plus 1 is 20. With a lot of other things, you'll add up the sugars and the other carbs. The other carbs are your whole grains, and your sugars are your more refined ones. And then if there's also fiber in there, because fiber is also a carbohydrate, but we normally don't count it as our calories because it goes through us, and we don't absorb it and have an insulin response because of it. So that's so if you add up the fiber, and then you'll see with the different types of fiber, basically, you just want to get fiber throughout the day. 15 to 20 grams is ideal for men and women. There's different RDA levels of there, but if you're getting at least about 20 grams a day, you're going to be all right. So look for things, if what you're eating, it doesn't have any fiber, then that's not a good thing. So, and then on to protein. Protein is not all created equal, but it will not list it how it is on there. It'll just give you macronutrient content of protein. We'll go over a little bit later about the different types of protein when we're going through what we put in our shopping cart. So that's how to read a nutrition label. You want to look at your macronutrients. It's always in the fat, carbohydrate, protein order, which is why I went over it in that order as I went through there. So fat, carbohydrate, and protein, and look at those. All too often we just look at a food and we look at the package, oh, this looks good, and we put it in our shopping cart. I say I said, I don't normally go grocery shopping, but that's what many people do. So we want to be looking at those. If the macronutrients aren't what we want to achieve our goals, then it doesn't matter what the rest of the stuff says, that's not going to be a great thing. So now we're going to look at the ingredients. Ingredients, it's not terribly hard to figure out what you want to do. There's a few things that you want to look for in there, but the biggest one, the number one thing you want to look for is how many ingredients long is it. If it's like 20 lines with a lot of things you can't pronounce, it's not as good of an option as something else. Some people refer to them as frankenfoods, because they're chemically engineered. Now, then look at those, and there's going to be sometimes it's just added vitamins and whatnot to it, but a lot of times there's a lot of processing. The more processing things that they do, then there's more little things that they do in there. And so, should we never have those things? Maybe in an ideal world we'll never have those things, but our bodies are made to process those. That's why we have a detoxifying system in our body. Our liver is the biggest one. I mean, it's a pretty big chunk that sits right there. It's our liver, and it's made to detoxify. But the cleaner we can eat, the less that our body has to do that, and the easier it is to feel healthy and be healthy and exercise. So that's the first thing you want to look. How many ingredients are there? For instance, if you go to the store, some bread will have like 10 lines of ingredients. But if you go to a real bakery, you'll see like 5 ingredients. There's a big difference in those. If you always go for the 5 ingredients over the 20 ingredients. And then after that, always, like I mentioned earlier, the trans fat, look for high hydrogenated oils. Sometimes it's vegetable oil, sometimes it's soybean oil, sometimes it's whatever. Other thing to look for, just so you have a better understanding as you're looking at the ingredients, sometimes it'll say contains 1 or more of the following. And you're like, what the heck? They just don't know what exactly they put in there? Well, what happens, depending on what is cheapest, a lot of times it's a soy or corn-based things that they put in there. Depending on what they can get cheapest, they've tested it out, they know what comes out, the consistency in the end the same way. So they just have a standard ingredients label they put for all those foods. And then there's 1 or more of one of the following concocted combinations of normally a soybean or a corn type of oil. And after that, it contains 2% or less of the following. You know, it's the same type of thing. Sometimes it'll be more, sometimes it'll be less. But normally, then, if you see a lot of things in there, you don't want those things, but there's pretty small amounts of it. Unless you're eating it all day long, it's not going to be a huge taxing on your system. After that, oftentimes people want to look at sugar. There's a lot of times for sugar things, you have sugar and you have high fructose corn syrup are the two main ones. High fructose corn syrup, while it's not as good as regular cane sugar, it's normally not something I focus on with people because there's about 100 other things I'm going to focus on before I talk about which sugars. I've looked at a lot of different studies. They're really inconclusive. There's a higher chance you're going to get more chemicals with the high fructose corn syrup because it's processed more than the sugar. But in the end, it's minor, and let's focus on some other things before we focus on which of those we get. But if you have a choice, and it's sixes, on the price and other things, go with the real sugar before that. After that, I look for aspartame. Aspartame is one of the fake sugars. It does have calories. Most people think it's calorie-free. It does have a few calories, but they have to use so many that it really doesn't add any calories to your diet, so they don't add it in there. It's like 1,000 times sweeter than sugar or something like that. It's a pretty high number, so they don't have to use much. So that's the ingredients. If you have any questions, again, we can go over that at the end. Now we're going to go into advertising of packages. The first one I want to go over, well, the first principle is always look and say, does that make sense, or why does it say that? Oftentimes, they didn't do anything differently. They're just advertising a feature that you could have seen in the nutrition label or in the ingredients. For instance, one of my favorite ones is ranch dressing. Here we have ranch dressing. And right here it says, naturally helps better absorb vitamin A and E. Vitamins A and E are fat-soluble vitamins. Basically, this is not a fat-free dressing. It's got the full fat content in there. And so, it does help absorb those vitamins better, which I advocate. If you're going to be having dressing on your salad, I like one with some fat. If you have salad without any fat, you don't absorb the nutrients near as well as if you have a little bit of fat with it. Most people don't just have salad without any fat in the middle, so it's not normally a huge deal. Normally they'll have some meat with it that has some fat, or potatoes that butter was put in it, or they'll have dessert at the end or something like that. So it's not a huge deal, but if you're just having a salad, make sure your dressing has a little bit of fat in it, or you're not getting near the benefit that you got out of your salad. Plus, dressing with fat tastes a little bit better normally anyway. So this one, I always think it's funny because then the ranch dressing that's fat-free advertises that it's fat-free. And so, pay attention to what, both those things you could have seen on the label. This label, you can see 13 grams of fat. Now that you know that fat-soluble vitamins get into your system, that's what fat-soluble means. They won't get into your system without fat. So if you don't have fat with it, it's not going to go across the membrane about the lining of your intestines. So that's see past the package advertising. Is that a good thing? Yes. Is that true? Yes. They can't put things that aren't true on there because there's regulation. There's tons of FDA regulations. For better and for worse, they are there, and sometimes they do benefit us. With a fat-free type of thing, look at the ingredients. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes fat-free have one of two things in it. One is that it has a lot more sugar. So it doesn't say reduce calories, it says fat-free. And so to make it still taste all right, they just put a lot more sugar in it. So if you see the one that's fat, one that's fat-free, look at them. A lot of times I like a little bit more fat than the sugar. If our body's better at burning fat, then we're going to lose more weight than if our body's better at burning sugar. So oftentimes I'll pick the one with fat, over the fat-free, even though most people say, oh, it's fat-free, I'm being healthier. Look and see if there's added sugar. If there's not added sugar, look for a sugar substitute. Oftentimes it's aspartame because it's the cheapest one. If it's stevia, that's fine. Stevia is a lot more natural, and it does a lot better to our body. Aspartame, it's debatable in the scientific literature what it does, but it has been linked in some cases to seizures. Is it a common thing? No. We all know people who drink diet soda all the time and aren't killing over with seizures. But if you're predisposed to that, aspartame has been correlated to that. And anytime something that's not natural is put into our body, I like to keep that to a minimum. So, also another thing is with Cheerios. We couldn't find these at the store last time we went, but I'm walking down the aisle and I see Cheerios. And it says cholesterol free. I thought, no duh. Cholesterol is made by animals, humans, animals, regular four-legged animals, whatever. And so meat will never say cholesterol free unless it's